Good morning, everybody. So you can see this okay, Carol, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming along to this webinar. So today's focus is to talk about dementia discovery research in Ireland. And my name is Barry Boland. I work in UCC. I'm predominantly working Alzheimer's disease. I've also worked in rare lysosomal storage diseases, which also affect cognitive function, causing dementia. So I'm also a member of the management committee of DRNI, and I've been involved for a couple of years now in the management committee because I feel very passionate about wanting funding support for Irish research in this area. So the overview of today's themes are really to convey the essential need for dementia discovery research. We're going to outline some infrastructure available in Ireland, both the physical buildings that are there as well as the personnel. Funding opportunities that are available. So this is both domestic within Ireland and links with international collaborations. Also providing a research career structure overview. So the themes of this series of webinars are really for early career researchers or ECRs. And I'll just give you a personal account of my own experience as I went from PhD to postdoc and onwards. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the need for research advocacy and how in certain countries, you know, in Europe as well as in the US, this is quite a mature area of where charities and people are contacting government and policymakers to try convey the need for further supports in this area. Okay, so if we talk about dementia, again, it's synonymous with the word cognitive decline, but the causes of dementia are under a wide umbrella. So I think this infographic really kind of starts things off really by getting a wide breadth of different diseases that affect cognitive function. So up here we can see it's an umbrella term that describes a collection of symptoms caused by disorders affecting the brain. It's not one specific disease. It can affect thinking, behavior, and the ability to perform everyday tasks. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, affecting maybe 40 to 70% of all dementia cases. With vascular dementia, we have about 15 to 25% of dementias, but there are other rare forms of dementia, Lewy body dementia, which is a form of Parkinsonism with dementia, and the Lewy bodies are the aggregates of alpha-synuclein, which are synonymous with Parkinson's disease. We also have frontotemporal dementias, which can be caused by mutations in a protein called tau. And then we have other dementias associated with, for example, traumatic brain injury can affect cognitive functions, Huntington's disease, even down to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and progressive supranuclear palsy. So when we think about dementia and the remit of what the DRNI supports, it's not just Alzheimer's disease, but it's anything that affects cognitive functions. Okay, so the vision and ambition for DRNI, when it was first originally established under the Biomark or Inbind organization over 10 years ago now with Brian Lawler and colleagues, this was aimed to really foster a collaborative network here in Ireland and also to reach out from Ireland to international collaborators. So the idea here is to promote a collaborative network, to coordinate research action that can then be, you know, engage the public, raise awareness, change policy and practice, build community and capacity, and then obviously raise funding. And this is a self-sustaining cycle, really, which each cog of the wheel depends on the next. So we have been making contributions here in Ireland to understanding the pathophysiology of diseases, looking at ways to measure biomarkers for diagnosis or therapeutics. And also last week's talk by Fiona Keogh talked about the social care and population health. So the centre in Galway is just specifically working on that, as well as the GBHI centre in Trinity College. We also want to engage in the public and involve policymakers to convey the importance of this important research. So within the DRNI network, when we look at the different themes of research, we aim to support basic science, which is mainly looking from molecules, biochemistry, cell biology, so the very core foundation, fundamental research, which I'll mainly speak about today. We also want to support clinical science, so this is called translational science, where you go from bench to bedside. That's the common phrase used, where where basic scientists like myself with pipettes in the lab would engage with clinicians, liaise, maybe collect biosamples for analysis, and eventually link in with maybe clinical trials. So the director of DRNI, Sean Kennelly, is involved in setting up a clinical trial network in Ireland, which will link up all the different centres around the country. And then last week, Fiona described population health and social science research that's going on in Ireland here as well. And that can affect everything from patient care to actual the economic costs of dementia. So for my talk today, I'm going to really focus on the wide breadth of dementia discovery research. And this is a phrase commonly called from molecules to mind. So for many of you listening in different parts of Ireland or abroad, you're aware that the brain is a very complex structure. It's one of the most difficult organs to understand in the body, but everything has its own building blocks. And if we go from down at the very lowest level and work our way up, we have neurochemistry, we have organelles inside neurons and glial cells. We understand how the single cells function in the brain. We can then move up into animal models of dementia, and then eventually we can look at post-mortem brain tissue and then understand brain imaging. So again, there's cognitive neuroscience taking place in different departments around the country. Now, I'm conscious of how many people are working in this space, and I'm purposely not going to single out different people along the journey, but I will identify the infrastructure and the type of research that is being conducted here in Ireland. So a quick point here is the complexity. In some ways, people get a little bit daunted when they talk about fundamental science and how intricate certain aspects of this is. So this is just a zoomed in schematic of a synaptic vesicle. And the reason I'm showing you this is just to convey the level of detail and work that has gone in throughout the last 50, 60 years in neuroscience that has really helped to build a very intricate jigsaw puzzle that shows us the importance of tiny nano size structures in the brain. And this really is generally generating new knowledge. So what I'm here to try convey is, while someone might look at this and say, well, what's the value of understanding all of these proteins that are on synaptic vesicles? Well, the real reason here is that a lot of these proteins are associated with neurological diseases. When the proteins are not functioning properly, they can be associated with epilepsy, schizophrenia, other psychiatric disorders, as well as neurodegenerative disorders. So with basic fundamental research, we're generating new knowledge, we're improving our understanding of complex systems, and we're providing new jigsaw pieces that will help us figure out this puzzle of life. We'll also get new perspectives on the world, because oftentimes science can often influence, how society works as well as culture and art. Now, eventually, with this new knowledge, we can apply this knowledge, and this is usually where innovations occur, and that's where funding agencies get their return on their investment, so to say. So these innovations can lead to identifying new drug targets for diseases, as well as stimulating the development of new therapies. And as we know, in this current COVID-19 crisis, a lot of funding is going into understanding how to stop the virus getting into cells. And we're having a world effort here, really like a big pursuit on this to try stop infections. But at the same time, in the background, a lot of research is being kind of stalled, so to speak, because other basic research, because of the requirements of us to stay indoors at the moment, and also with funding agencies, their funding may be affected by the current economic situation. So it is very difficult to justify this research, but at the same time, in the long run, there's a lot of evidence that the return on investment is definitely worth it. Okay, so we think about Ireland's cost of dementia. It is Ireland. We have dementia here is Ireland's most expensive disease. So again, this is a pie chart showing the breakdown of incidences of dementia, and again, Alzheimer's being the largest, vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, as I showed earlier on. In Ireland, there's over 67,000 people living with dementia and Parkinson's. So it's thought that about 55,000 people in Ireland have dementia and 12,000 have Parkinson's. So that's enough to fill Croke Park on a All-Ireland final day. Over 600,000 families have a family member living with dementia. So the number of people with dementia is expected to double in the next 20 years in the absence of a preventative intervention. So you can see here that some action, obviously, it's a global effort taking place, and Ireland needs to play its part in that effort. In Ireland, we think that, again, this is costing from the economics, pharmacoeconomics costing, as well as social care and time taken from work to care for people with dementia. It's estimated that these costs run up to about 2 billion per year, more than stroke, cancer and heart disease combined. This is a screenshot from the Alzheimer's Research UK, which just shows the demographics of an aging population. And as you can see here, the incidence of Alzheimer's disease in different age groups. So if you look at the under 60s, between 60 and 64, very low incidences. But when people are reaching their mid 80s, the proportionate incidences go up very dramatically. So with an increasing aging population, the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease is going to increase. Now, when we think about current treatments that are available for Alzheimer's disease, there's only 4 drugs that are out there on the market, and unfortunately no new drug has been approved in almost 20 years. That these drugs boost neurotransmitters in the brain, preferentially acetylcholine. 3 of the drugs boost acetylcholine, and 1 of them blocks glutamate receptors. And these are known as symptomatic therapies. So if someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and their cognition is declining, this would be a normal trajectory of their memory scores, for example, a mini mental state exam. Now, if they take a symptomatic drug treatment, they will get temporary improvement in their cognitive function, but it will decline with time. Now, currently, there are no disease-modifying therapies available for Alzheimer's disease. In normal aging, we have a certain allowance for the decline in cognitive function, but with Alzheimer's disease, we have this exponential drop. If there was a disease-modifying therapy discovered, it would obviously have major implications. Now, in France, just there 2 years ago in 2018, the government decided to stop reimbursing these drugs because of 1, the cost, and 2, there may be significant side effects associated. So these are the frontline drug treatments that are out there, and some countries are saying the cost-benefit ratio is no longer warranted. So this just, again, reiterates the need for new improved drugs. Now, moving on into the infrastructure of what's going on here in Ireland in the framework, this is just an overview that was put together as part of the DRNI's information leaflet to just show people who want to get involved or want to know what's happening with dementia research in Ireland. And again, it spans the 4 provinces of Ireland. And again, I'm purposely not going into particular PIs that are involved, because if I leave out one person, someone will obviously complain. So it's just a general overview, starting with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, which is our main national fundraising organisation. Predominantly supports caregiving and respite homes throughout the country. We have the Dublin Brain Bank, which was set up in RCSI and Boland Hospital. So this is where people would donate brain tissue, both control as well as dementia subjects and other diseases, which can be then analysed for biomarkers and look at different pathophysiology of Alzheimer's. The Global Brain Health Institute, or GBHI, has been set up through funding from philanthropic funding from Atlantic Philanthropies, and that's being run in Trinity College. We've got UCD, which has a Centre of Excellence in Neuroscience. Again, it has a Centre of Applied Neuroscience here as well. Trinity College has TCIN. We have this partnership between RCSI, DCU and Maynooth University. So these arrows again aren't pointing to Kildare, they're just kind of pointing in that general vicinity. But a lot of cognitive research goes on in Maynooth University, RCSI, the Technological University of Dublin, National College of Ireland, DCU, Future Neuro, which is partnership between RCSI and other institutes, which I'll talk about soon. So this gives you an overview of all these different centres. And then down here in Cork, where I'm based, we have Cork Neuroscience, we have the Centre for Gerontology and Rehabilitation, we have an SFI funded centre called the APC, so it's the Alimentary Pharmacobiotic Centre. And that studies relationships between the microbiome, and there's interesting work going with aging and people in retirement homes, how the microbiome is affected here. In Limerick, we have different researchers involved, and then heading up to Galway, which is synonymous with medical devices. We also have the Galway Neuroscience Centre. So again, if you want to have a full comprehensive list of who's involved in DRNI, the researchers, there's a database we're collecting. So if anyone's on the database or isn't on the database, they want to get involved, I'd advise contacting Carol and we can link up, and there's now a newsletter which has been sent out so everyone can stay informed. Okay, so the big game changer in Ireland really was Future Neuro, which kind of came on board in 2018. Now, if you look at the different centres around Ireland, we have 5 designated centres of excellence. There's about 100 PIs, 60 that would mainly classify themselves as saying, I'm a dementia researcher. Again, there's a wide range from social care to psychology, right down to molecular biology. So we have UCC, TCIN, the TRIU partnership between RCSI, NUI Maynooth and DCU, and then Galway and UCD. So there are these hubs of activity around, and we generally meet up at Neuroscience Ireland meetings. And just last year we had the British Neuroscience Association had a meeting in the Convention Centre in Dublin, where we got an opportunity to engage with researchers throughout the European and international researchers, and had a chance to engage with the public here as well. So the big one really at the moment for funding is Future Neuro, which was set up as an SFI centre. So Science Foundation Ireland are the chief funding agency for basic science in Ireland. This has been set up with funding of 7.98 million over 6 years. And Professor David Henshaw is involved, is the director here of this institute. They're mainly focusing on epilepsy, motor neuron disease, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury, and Alzheimer's. Now, for someone not involved in the centre, there are opportunities to create a spoke, which is a link with these centres. And again, there's an incentive to collaborate with industry. And then it's helping to establish and expand national funding organisations. So there's a buy-in from charities as well here. So if charities can get involved, it's highly encouraged. As far as supportive organisations go in Ireland, we have many different charities and organisations. I'll just spend a minute or two giving an overview of these. So the Alzheimer's Society, again, is our chief funding agency, which is involved in Alzheimer's dementia research. We also have Parkinson's.ie, Huntington's, the Motor Neuron Disease Association. Dementia Research Network Ireland are mainly linking in with these charities, engaging with patient practitioner engagement. We have Neuroscience Ireland, which would be the flagship basic science research organisation. And we also have the Irish Brain Council, which is set up to really raise awareness on the need for investment in research and funding advocacy, which I'll come back to at the end of the talk. So to kind of move into this idea of funding research, because the value of basic research, there's a famous quote here from Mary Lasker, who's associated with the Lasker Prize in Medicine. And the quote here is, if you think research is expensive, try disease. And this infographic here from Bloomberg News shows the cost here in America at the current status quo is costing, over 250 billion. But the economic analysis was costed in that if someone could receive an earlier diagnosis and have better support, better care, and plan for their cases of dementia, they could actually make significant savings. So there's an article here in 2018 saying detecting Alzheimer's early could save America 7.9 trillion. And this is just detection. It's not actually just curing or slowing down the progress. So it's a significant savings. So I'll just move into a new conversation here about actual frontline research and the basic costs of research. So the running costs of biomedical research are what most researchers would, keeps them up at night wondering how they're going to get their next grant funding. Oftentimes we spend our time thinking about experiments, but nearly half the time is spent thinking about funding. So just a very quick for people who aren't involved in basic biomedical research, the cost of consumables is a massive cost, and consumable costs are coming from grants, and grants have to be, competitively awarded. So this is just, for example, if I'm running an experiment in the lab and I use an antibody, these cost between 300 and 600 euro. cell culture media is €50 a bottle. You'd use at least one a week or more. Chemicals, experimental drugs, 500. If you're doing animal work with animal experiments, the cost of housing and those would be very, very high. So this is just a projected estimate of a typical postdoc project. So if you are getting a grant to fund a postdoc, the combined salary and consumables could cost between 50 and 60,000 a year. A PhD would cost between 25,000 and upwards. So you can see here that someone needs to get the funding in order to sustain this research, and it's mainly in Ireland at the moment. The majority of funding is coming from government agencies. I know in other countries, in the US, maybe a quarter of their funding can come from within the universities through tenure track positions, but that tradition isn't currently available in Ireland. We also pay 23% VAT on our consumables. So in other areas such as medicine, medical equipment and appliances, these are zero rated VAT items. So 23% VAT, you can quickly see how a grant budget can be quickly eaten away through salaries and VAT. Now in other sectors such as food, tourism and jobs, they pay 9%. In farming, I think it's 4%. So this idea of campaigning for a lower VAT rate would be a great incentive here, I think. Moving in towards the funding agencies themselves. So when we think about basic discovery research, this can apply across a broad range of research, from basic to applied to translational, all the way up to patients. Now, I won't have time to go into all the different funding streams that are available, but the main ones available in Ireland for both early career researchers as well as established PIs would be Science Foundation Ireland, the Health Research Board and Irish Research Council. Now, these agencies offer funding that would allow funding from someone who's just starting a PhD. They can apply with their supervisor. In the case of the IRC, the student themselves applies for a PhD studentship. They also have some postdoctoral fellowships. They have industry engagement fellowships as well here in SFI. So there's a lot of funding opportunities there. In the HRB, I myself obtained a HRB fellowship back in 2008 for 3 years. Unfortunately, they've been discontinued, but hopefully will be reinstated, because a fellowship, a postdoctoral fellowship, really gives the researcher the chance to become an independent researcher, and they're quite scarce in Ireland at the moment. The Higher Education Authority does offer a few, again, across all disciplines, including life sciences as well as the humanities research as well. Enterprise Ireland are seen as more as a commercial avenue. So if someone has, let's say, a biomarker assay they want to commercialize, there's funding resources available there through Enterprise Ireland. The Health Research Charities of Ireland, previously known as MRCG, the Medical Research Charities Group, these are a group that would partner with a charity, where the charity would donate maybe 50% of the costs, and the HRB, it's a subsidiary of the HRB, which funds up to €1 million per year in combined charity funding. So you would have rare diseases. There's a particular charity that's involved in multiple sulfatase deficiency, MSD, and they've partnered with HRCI to fund research. So there are some kind of niche areas that can be looked at. Atlantic Philanthropies, again, have made massive investment in both infrastructure, in the buildings in the Conway Institute, as well as the Western Gateway building in Cork. We have National Children's Research Centre in Crumlin. They fund, again, conditions affecting children, not just neurological, but a wide range. But there is a possibility of getting funding through that. If someone wants to travel to America, there's the Fulbright partnership, the US. And then there's also some travel fellowships that the Royal Irish Academy offer. Now, this isn't a fully comprehensive list. And again, we have a speaker from HRB coming on, Annalisa Montesanti, in the seminar series in middle of June. So she will go into more detail on those funding streams. But if you are an early career researcher, I would say the minute you qualify for your PhD, the clock starts ticking on the eligibility of which grants you're eligible to apply for. So this is a good infographic on early to mid-career opportunities that are available through SFI. So as you can see here, the years post-PhD, if you start off after about 2 years post-PhD, you're eligible to apply for these starting investigator research grants. So you've got this window here up to 8 years. And these are very highly competitive fellowships. Oftentimes people may have done one or two postdocs, maybe have gone abroad and then come back to Ireland just when they're competitive and maybe kind of parachute in around this zone. And that's where I believe most people have been successful. It is possible to get it very early on. Also, the Career Development Award is ones that are mainly, again, the funding is higher. You get about, I think it's 500,000 over 6 years for the CDA. And with the surge, I think it's 300 to 400,000. But again, if you're hiring postdocs, you're hiring one or two PhD students, this kind of funding is going to go pretty quickly. The SFI President of Ireland Future Irish Research Leader Award, called the PIRA. These are, again, very elite awards. Maybe 4 to 5 of them are awarded nationally, up to €1 million, and again are exceptionally high standard of people getting these. Again, they can run up to about 15 years. So my advice would be, when someone gets their PhD, from the day of graduation, the clock is ticking, and this is where there's a windows of eligibility that is heading this towards the transition towards leadership. Now, myself, Carol Rogan in DRNI, and Professor Cora O'Neill were involved in doing an assessment of funding for a meeting we organised in UCC in 2018. Now, the majority of this work, Carol collated funding records from the HRB, SFI, IRC, and the EU, and philanthropy, and we made this overview, a pie chart really, that kind of puts a record really of 7 years of funding that was awarded here in Ireland from 2011 to 2017. And as you can see here, there was over 40 million given towards neurodegenerative research. Okay, and then this would average out over those 7 years at about 5.7 million per year. Now, this is a significant investment, and the research teams have benefited greatly from this. Per person per year, we actually have worked out that in Ireland, let's say we have a population of about 4.8 million. If we actually divide this by per person per year, we think it's about €1.2 per annum per person in the Republic of Ireland. So that's less than the price of a cup of coffee. So I think, it sends home the message that, the investment really in Ireland, whether it's through charity agencies or government, is still very, very low, and compared to other countries, which I'll come back to later. And then in this particular budget, less than 3% of the national research budget is actually, being awarded specifically for neurodegenerative disease research. Now, if we break this down at the HRB, again, we can see, is it clinical research? So the HRB is predominantly funding clinical versus discovery, whereas SFI is predominantly funding discovery research. This big pot of money here really is reflected in the establishment of these centres, as well as the career development starting investigator grant. So again, these are well-funded grants, but they're actually very difficult to get. They're very competitive. So moving on into another conversation, a little bit about, is dementia funding a priority in Ireland? I just put forward a case of how important it is with the numbers increasing. So in 2013, this is after the recession, the government had a reassessment of what they were funding, and the current committee at the time, called FORFOS, established the priority areas. And this statement here reflects this idea of moving research from a basic research model into funding research that has significant economic opportunity, in which Ireland already has strength and can realistically develop such strengths. Now, these themes that were funded, I've highlighted the ones in yellow, which would relate to ones involved in neurodegenerative disease research, things like diagnostics, therapeutics, and food for health. But the majority of these funding themes are outside the remit, so we wouldn't really be applying for that in discovery research. So energy, climate action, services, and business processes. Now, these generally align with EU priorities. It's not just happening here in Ireland. So health and well-being is a priority in the EU, but actually basic funding is very difficult to get ring-fenced funding for. So in 2018, health and well-being was then amalgamated with connected health, medical devices, diagnostics, and therapeutics. And my question here is that if this is being ring-fenced as a priority, we really need to have more dedicated funding calls for these specific teams. Because currently, if we look through the funding outcomes, I believe that these areas have actually probably not received the level of funding that they probably need to have to align with those priorities. Okay, so if we go on into Ireland versus international standards, you know, there's a phrase, to compare is to reject, and I'm not here to say we're not doing a great job, but I am here to say we could do better. And there's also a phrase, a lot done, more to do. I won't mention which political party said that, and you know, we mightn't be having this conversation if things were different due to the recession. But in 2012, the current Prime Minister, David Cameron, in the UK, made a statement with the G8 at a G8 summit, saying they wanted England to be the best country in the world to undertake research into dementia. And following this, the government dedicated 250 million to setting up a Dementia Research Institute, partnered with the Alzheimer's Research UK and the Alzheimer's Society. So this is a major achievement, and also philanthropic funding. You know, this was a really powerhouse of a research centre. There's different institutes based throughout the UK. In the US, Congress is increasing the budgets year on year. You know, there's NIH budgets that are going up again each year from this. So this is ring-fenced money that's going towards dementia. In Germany, there's DZNE centres. There's 10 sites around Germany, over 30 research teams. So these are centrally government-funded agencies. In Ireland, if we increased our funding from €1.20 per person per year to €5, we would be up there with the international norms. So this is kind of showing that the current funding is good, but we need more to justify to being at that European and international level. Now, a model that's one that's really close to my interests, and I just keep finding it very inspiring, is the model in France. This is called the Intern, and they have different thematic centres. And the idea behind this is that it doesn't prioritise one disease over the other. It looks across the spectrum of medical research, from genetics, molecular biology, cell biology, immunology, cancer, the pathophysiology of disease, and neuroscience, cognitive sciences are in there. And they also have other institutes for public health and health technologies. So what I think this kind of answers that conundrum of, if we are to prioritize research, at least, you know, break basic research or biomedical research into core themes. So one isn't given certain priority over the other, but all of them are funded in a proportional way. So again, these notes will be put up on the DRNI website. And this idea suggests we've got basic research here, where experiments are running, and then it moves its way out into new knowledge, creating new diagnostics, therapies, and innovations that eventually help the public. Okay, so again, if an Irish researcher wants to apply for funding outside of Ireland, we have international funding opportunities. And again, the European agencies here, Horizon 2020, European Research Council, again, very, very prestigious grants. There's a handful of researchers in Ireland who have established labs who've received these awards. Again, most of them would have had the SFI PIRA award as a springboard to show that they're an internationally well-recognized researcher. The Marie Curie actions are a wide spectrum, from PhD fellowships, which you can get through the ITNs, which are collaborative networks, very competitive. The postdoc fellowships, again, are partly the PI, their standing, as well as the applicant standing. Erasmus, again, the programs are increasing for students. I took on an Erasmus student in January. Unfortunately, from March onwards, they weren't able to go into the lab. So there is a certain element of, at the moment, we're in lockdown mode. JPND is called the Joint Programming Initiative for Neurodegenerative Disease Research, really instrumental for funding. A lot of Irish researchers have benefited from this. As far as the types of funding, it can range from basic funding, basic science, into more social science. And recently this year it was about brain imaging. So in Ireland, it's not just an open application, they have actually thematic calls. The COEN grant is another one. I didn't include an image here. The COEN one is one that's linked between Canada, the UK, Europe, and Ireland as well. Wellcome Trust funds great basic research, Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, the Alzheimer's Association, They mainly fund fellowships in the case of international applicants. At the moment, they kind of have more priority towards early career researchers. I got a new investigator research grant when I came back from the States myself, and it's been very instrumental, allowed me to take on a PhD student. Bright Focus Foundation involved in Alzheimer's as well as in macular degeneration. AR UK. In Ireland, we're currently able to apply for pilot grants up to 50,000 sterling, but we're not eligible to apply for PI grants unless they're collaborations with a PI in the UK. The Western Brain Institute has been great in helping to fund research both in Canada, mainly in Canada, but they've reached out to Ireland and the Netherlands with a biomarker call. Industry collaborations, again, I've been fortunate to link in with certain companies to do contract research, and this is a vital way of linking in with industry. They value assays that are generated in the lab. So this is work I've worked with small companies in the UK as well as currently working with Takeda. And we have a speaker from Biogen coming on later in the week to talk about industry research. Okay, so I'm conscious of time here, so I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes trying to finish up talking about the challenges faced by early and late career researchers. So at the moment in Ireland, we have an absence of tenure track positions, and this is a reflection of the funding available in Irish universities. Unlike places in America where there's endowments and a history of philanthropy, Ireland's only beginning to get that going now. So in some universities, I've noticed there have been some tenure track, I think in UCD and in RCSI and in Trinity. So some of this is kind of reflective of the internal funding structures these universities have. At the moment, there are few openings for full-time academic positions, so this can lead to a bottleneck between very good, successful postdocs and then finding themselves unable to stay in Ireland because of the lack of openings. There are career frameworks within universities that make it difficult to retain senior staff, and I'll talk about this mapping in a few minutes. Funding agencies are prioritising research that have obvious commercial potential. So in our grant applications now, we have to talk about impact statements, how the idea may translate to an applied business, which puts an extra challenge for basic scientists to think about these commercial opportunities. Oftentimes, if you look at the development of graphene, which was discovered in Manchester as a basic science, at the time, the implications weren't obvious, but now it's taken a massive, for semiconductors, the implications of basic science may not always be obvious, but this is where at the moment it's more likely to be funded if it has a commercial potential. Unfortunately, less than 6% of PhD graduates will obtain full-time academic positions. So that's where if you were to speak to PhD students now, say, what do you want to do when you're graduated? Doing postdocs, some of them may get disillusioned with the frustration of experiments not working, but a lot of them would like to stay in research. And I think more needs to be done to either, we have to weigh up, should we have more PhD graduates that are getting highly trained in very specialist skills if they may not apply those skills in their full-time course in the future, but they also do develop transferable skills, which is important for going into industry or other non-academic careers. So this is just a quick overview of the current research career framework that exists throughout Ireland at the moment. This would be where a PhD student would be working for 4 years, up to 4 years, and then they become a postdoc fellow. So at this point, the cost of funding a PhD student to a postdoc obviously becomes a lot higher, and there's less funding available. So there's a narrowing of this spectrum. And again, as the person becomes a research fellow, these are very challenging to get independent funding right now in Ireland. I call this a candle of hope framework. Again, when you think about a pyramid scheme in some ways, someone will get through up to the top, but my current honest opinion is that while PhDs and postdocs might find it difficult, when you actually get to the point where you are a lecturer and you're trying to get funding, it's equally as challenging, if not more challenging, because you're conscious of keeping funding going in a lab. Whereas with a postdoc, you're mainly focused on achieving the research and you don't have as much administrative or teaching burden. Okay, so another career advancement thing, would be if you were to move outside of Ireland and then come back to Ireland. So some of the pros involved here in working outside of Ireland would be you get to work with internationally renowned researchers. I think Irish PhD students are valued among the international community as hardworking, diligent. and have new creative ideas. I also think we can build and maintain collaborations with mentors and peers. I myself, I worked in New York and I've worked in Oxford, and I've maintained those collaborations with colleagues I've worked with. You can bring back new knowledge and expertise to Ireland, be more competitive for Irish fellowships, and again, get cultural experiences. Some of the cons, the downsides of this is that oftentimes if you move to a new country, you may lose the momentum by starting on a new project. Let's say if you finish a PhD and you've got some unfinished papers, sometimes staying in the lab to get them done, gets more publications out. If you start a new project, moving can take time to build that momentum. There may be less networking opportunities with Irish researchers. And if you're at postdoc training, you may be adding on years that might cost at the fellowship applications. Also missing friends, family and cultural life. But at the same time, that's where someone needs to weigh up those. And that's where I suppose the vocation of doing research comes in, is that we're not in it for the money, we're in it for the passion and the interest in trying to make new discoveries. And sometimes we weigh up these pros and cons to make that decision. So if someone's finishing a PhD going, do I really want to go for that next stage? These are the kind of thoughts that maybe you have to kind of think about. Okay, so finally finishing up here a little bit on what we need, or maybe going forward, with investment solutions and opportunities. So our International Brain Research Organisation, IBRO, funds events, and the DANA Foundation funds Brain Awareness Week. So I've received funding in 2018 to host a meeting in UCC called Funding Irish Research for Neurodegenerative Diseases of the Brain. And we attracted some international speakers to this, ranging from Adrian Ivanson of the AOR UK, Ralph Martins from Australia, Huang Yu, who was in Colombia at the time and has since moved to Toronto to set up his own lab there, and Fionnuala Sweeney, an award-winning journalist who spoke highly about reaching out to the public and the importance of engaging the public. And she has a radio show about that on RT at the time, or recently. So we kind of had a great think tank about this and came up with some ideas. Obviously, the first idea would be to keep the collaboration and interactions with government funding agencies, industry and philanthropy to enhance the research investment and career opportunities. Also engage more with the public patient involvement, or PPI, because they're a vital source of support. In the UK, we have there's a website called Join Dementia Research, and they actually encourage the public to engage in clinical trials. AOR UK follow the same thing. If we could increase funding from Irish charities, in the UK, the Alzheimer's Society gives 5% of their takings to research, which does amount to a significant amount. But I know in Ireland right now that the charities are probably experiencing difficulties in sustaining funding with the climate. But if there was certain money within a charity ring fence to research, it would be a great support. And if this possibility, would it be possible to establish a neuroscience research charity itself? Because there is an appetite for funding out there, and there's great initiatives being done. As you can see, even with the motor neuron disease, fundraising has been really, really high for research. So I think Ireland could be more creative in this area as well. Finally, I'll finish up on the effectiveness of advocacy. So at this meeting, we had speakers who had been at the front line, who had been campaigning in Washington, going up to the Senate and engaging with senators, trying to pass legislation. In Ireland, there have been, a foundation here, the Irish Brain Council, that's involved again in research advocacy. So there are groups, international groups, that are out there supporting the need to fund more research, including Research America and the European Brain Council. So the main point here is to kind of show this funding is needed. We're doing good, but we could do better, and we keep up the momentum. Okay, thanks very much for your time.
That's great. Thanks very much, Barry, and thanks to everyone who stayed online. I know we went a bit over time, but I think that was really valuable information that Barry was giving there, and kind of delivered in a really nice, kind of concise way. So yeah, that was really, really good, and I hope everyone found that useful. And particularly near the end, very much specific to the early career people. So we had one question coming in about the efficacy of of various drug treatments, so donepezil, galantamine, memantine, etc. I know you did have a slide in relation to that. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say about the efficacy of those drugs.
So based on that, yeah, these drugs are symptomatic drug treatments, which boost, in the case of donepezil, galantamine, and rivastigmine, they're acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So in Alzheimer's, the neurons that are degenerating are in the basal forebrain cholinergic neurons. So the degeneration of these neurons continues, but the drug boosts the levels of synaptic transmitter, the acetylcholine molecule, by preventing its breakdown. Unfortunately, you're staying ahead of the curve, but the curve is continuing to drop because the disease is progressing. Memantine is a NMDA antagonist. So in Alzheimer's, there's excitotoxicity, which can affect absence seizures, causing in the hippocampus. There's a lot of glutamatergic neurons in there. Again, this would be prescribed at more mid to late stages of Alzheimer's disease, but unfortunately, they don't stop the progression. They may give a temporary benefit, but this temporary benefit, is continuing to drop down. So, that's why they're amazing drugs. In the case of Parkinson's, there's a drug called L-Dopa. If anyone has seen the film Awakenings, watch that film. You can see how effective it is at the early stages, but as people build up tolerance, the effectiveness decreases, and it doesn't stop the disease progression.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned about the disease-modifying therapies, and I saw there was the Edinburgh Consensus paper from 2017, authored by Craig Ritchie and colleagues, and they were saying that there could well be disease-modifying therapies for Alzheimer's disease in the coming years. So it's quite an exciting time, I suppose, in terms of better treatments. I know we're not quite there yet. I think we're all just, really looking forward to.
There are lifestyle choices, exercise. There's people following different diets, which again, the epidemiology of this is only beginning to come out. And, for example, people who have the risk gene ApoE4 are associated with a higher onset of Alzheimer's, but in certain parts of Africa where it's very high, their diet influences that, and their risk for dementia is lower than if they're in the West, in a Western diet. So diet, lifestyle, sleep, stress, there's a huge melting pot of factors, but age is the biggest risk factor. And, that's where understanding aging is a very basic function. There's, I was reading a couple of books about, just understanding the aging process recently, and funding for dementia might be low, but actually understanding aging itself is very, very little funding in towards that. And that's the elephant in the room, really, when it comes to these diseases.
Yeah. So there's another question. Hi Barry, I'm doing a small piece of research around younger onset dementia. Are you familiar with any research in this area?
Yeah, so I worked in rare diseases, metabolic diseases like lysosomal storage diseases, which can affect infants as young as 1 or 2 years of age. There's a disease called Niemann-Pick's disease, and again, the severity depends on how badly mutated the proteins are. But in the case of people under 65, generally younger onset would be classed as pre-senile, which is below 65 years of age. But this could be people in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Generally, there's a genetic component to them. In the case of Huntington's, it's an autosomal dominant mutation. But with younger onset dementia, again, there's a range of diseases. We have frontotemporal dementia, PSP, tauopathies, even prion disease, which can be a sporadic form of dementia. But I think if the person wants to get in contact, linking in with clinicians, charities in Ireland for very rare diseases like that are probably non-existent, but maybe there is a need for more community-based, and DRNI could serve as that hub really for these people to get in contact.
Yeah, great. And certainly, we would work closely with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, and I know there are a number of members of their working groups who would fall into that category of the young onset dementia, and they're quite active in terms of advocacy. So there are significant numbers out there. So definitely a very important area. And there's the whole issue of access to services if you're under 65, etc. So a lot of challenges. So there's another question here. Yeah, comment about, you were just talking about the prevention side of things. So is there much research into the area of prevention, like the work of Dean Shirzai in the US, whereby the benefits of diet, exercise, stress reduction and restorative roles for individuals are highlighted as effective? So I think you were, yeah.
And there have been studies in Scandinavia with different, you know, fish oils, vitamin E, you know, these have been ruled in and ruled out. There are some therapies that are non-approved therapies like resveratrol, metformin, rapamycin. Like, again, I'm not saying these are going to be beneficial, but in animal models, they're showing benefit. But we also have to be aware that some of these drugs taken chronically can have secondary effects. I think rapamycin would be an example. It can cause type 2 diabetes if it's taken for too long in humans. So while I would be cautious about, you know, headlines that are in the media saying new drug improves lifespan and it's done in a mouse model, because if you look at the case of thalidomide, some of the studies that were done in those animals in the 1960s weren't done in, you know, pregnant animals, and they had side effects. So we have to be very careful about non-approved nutraceuticals that are that have not been FDA approved or EMA approved.
Yeah, and certainly I know there's the PREVENT study, again led by Craig Ritchie in Edinburgh. So and Trinity are linked in with that study. So there are you know, it's very interesting research in the area of prevention. It's definitely it's a big area of focus for certain researchers. Yeah. Okay.
But I suppose the technologies and brain imaging is getting really high tech now, where you can have PET scans that can say I'm at stage like BRAC stage 2 or 3. So people who are concerned about their memory could enroll in a trial earlier. So while right now we can't predict what can prevent it, but if someone is able to detect it early, they're at a better chance of being on a clinical trial to actually be on that lucky trial that can actually make a difference. And, you know, a lot of times people have a kind of an opinion about Alzheimer's. Well, by the time you get it, it's already too late. But if we can slow it down, someone who could have a very good quality of life with mild cognitive impairment, and the cost then to society and the family and you know, financial cost would be delayed for a significant amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's another question here. Why are monoclonal antibodies not successful to treat Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, so this is the contentious one about the amyloid hypothesis, and they can also affect tau as well. But a monoclonal antibody is specifically binding to what's considered a pathogenic substance called the amyloid beta protein. And this is dating back to the 1980s, when they found that plaques in the brain were mainly composed of aggregated peptides called amyloid beta peptide. So the pharmaceutical companies, again, it originated through an idea that was a spin-off company from Elan Pharmaceuticals in Ireland called Athena Neurosciences in the year 2000, where they actually immunized mice that had plaques with the peptide to try get the immune system to remove the plaque out of the brain. And while it was very effective in removing the plaque, and these monoclonal antibodies will remove the plaque, but we're into a new debate then about cause or consequence. And right now you can remove as much plaque out of the brain, but we don't seem to get the cognitive benefit. So then that's making us wonder, is the plaque actually a cause of the disease or a consequence of the disease? Because if there's a cause that's causing the plaque, you can remove the plaque, but if you didn't remove the cause, you're still going to get cognitive decline. And that's where huge investments have gone into this. A lot of companies are, you know, following suit and following this. But if these trials are not deemed efficacious, they're obviously going to be very, very expensive medicines as well. So, you know, there's a cost benefit really question here. But personally, I'm a little bit of a skeptic about removing these potentially pathogenic substances when there may be another cause behind the scenes that could be causing the disease.
Yeah. And shows the need for ever more research. The complexity is
exactly, and that's it. Researchers can always be wrong, and they say, I got that one wrong, and that's where science, you throw out old hypotheses, bring in the new ones. But that's the whole idea of the scientific method, is to say, well, we think this is what's causing it, let's try find it out. And the more effort that goes into it, and you can see with COVID research right now, loads of labs are working around the clock to try develop new therapies, new vaccines. But meanwhile, funding for a disease which is affecting as much in society is probably not getting the same focus or funding support, which maybe might, the public might appreciate a bit more the need for more funding, hopefully following this particular crisis, because biomedical research is expensive, it takes time, it takes a lot of research. So hopefully we'll get a bit more progress soon.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all the questions. So thanks very much again, Barry, and for answering all the questions.
And these comments are my own, as they say, so whatever I'm saying here, it's not a reflection of anyone else, it's just my own. It's an interactive conversation, so yeah.
Yeah, and a comment just came in, really useful to get a practical, considered overview of career progression for early career researchers and insight into the pharmacology research scene. So yeah, people are appreciating the talk. And so thanks to everyone for staying online as well. I know we went way over time, but I think it's such an interesting topic, that obviously there's interest there, and people were free to stay online. So thanks very much for that. Okay, so and any contact myself or Barry if you have any follow-up questions in relation to the webinar, and feedback. We'll get feedback at the end of the 6 sessions. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Take care, everybody. Have a good day.